On today's Rice Report, I have the honor and privilege of being joined for the third time by the author of the Creature from Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffin. I will include a link down below in the video description and above for the playlist with his two previous appearances, and I definitely encourage you to check those episodes out. I also encourage you to make sure if you do not own a copy of this book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, you are doing yourself a disservice. Before we get into it, take time to visit my website at ricetvx.com. There you can sign up for my mailing list so you can stay up to date on all things Rice. Once you've signed up for my mailing list, you will find links for my channels and socials towards the top of the website. Make sure you are subscribed to both of my YouTube channels, Rice Against the Grain and Rice TVX. If you want to support my work directly, as well as get early access, exclusive content for both channels, plus more, join my Patreon. I will include links in the video description for everything I just mentioned, as well as everything shared on today's video. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me on today's show is a very special guest. Joining me for his third appearance, the man who red-pilled Rice. I am joined by Mr. G. Edward Griffin. He is the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, in case you don't know, and I will have links down below for his previous appearances. Mr. G, welcome back to the show. How's it going, my friend?
Well, thanks for inviting me back. Well, it's going pretty well. I mean, considering how the world is coming apart and the wheels are coming off, we're doing pretty good here.
We are, especially considering everything that is happening, and that's another reason why I think it's like really good timing to have you on the channel. Considering you did write the book that most people would refer to as the Bible of the Federal Reserve, kind of getting a real full understanding of what took place with the creation of the Federal Reserve and where we are today. I thought it was very monumental when I had you on last year, but this year is making last year look a little tame. So far with the bank failures that we've had, 3 of the bank failures have equated out so far to being more than or equal to the 2008 crash. I don't know if you know about that. The banks that went down in 2008. So I got an article here from the New York Post, and you'll see this chart right here. Mm-hmm. This is the 2008 banks. It was $524 billion with the collapses, and it was Washington Mutual Bank, 24 other banks in 2008, and in 2023, between Signature, Silicon Valley Bank, and First Republic Bank, it's $532 billion, which is actually more than 2008.
Wow.
It's crazy. It's crazy to even. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's very impressive. Yeah.
And people are not talking about this. People are not talking because obviously, I mean, we're headed for recession, but considering that this is worse than what we've experienced in the past, it looks like it could be going into like some recessionary levels. So I guess the first thing that I would like to ask you, and I will also have links for everything on screen. I will have a link for the playlist that include your previous appearances, and I'll share that up right now. But you wrote the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which, again, is about the creation of the Federal Reserve, this monstrosity that has grown its plan into where we are today. And I'd like to get your opinion and your thoughts, sir, as to what you are thinking about with what is going on with the Federal Reserve today in comparison to when you first wrote the book.
Well, that's quite a comparison because up until a few months ago, or a year or so ago, which is short-term history in terms of the Federal Reserve System, it was what you might call more of the same, gradualism, moving constantly in the wrong direction, the problems getting worse and worse and worse, but pretty much the same thing going on, more of the same, more of the same, more of the same. And now all of a sudden, it's something different. something drastically different. And it's in my awareness, my memory of everything I've read about banking throughout history. This is the first time in history we're facing these kinds of shifts in activities in the banking world, the monetary world. So the question is, well, what is that shift? I think everybody has an idea that there's something really different going on. And the difference is kind of hard to describe because we don't have the vocabulary for it. It's not happened before. So the best I can say is that up until now, I think the central banks of the world, including the Federal Reserve System, which is at the head of the pack, have been playing a game you might call kick the can, kick the can down the street, and let the next administration or the next generation worry about the consequences. Um, Patch it over. Just keep it appearing as though it's working, even though we know it's the egg shell is hollow. The egg is not inside the shell, even though the egg looks like it's still the same egg. We know that all the stuff on the inside of the egg is gone. It's a hollow egg, but we'll pretend like it's a real egg. And they've been playing that game. Now, the game, for lack of a better analogy, is that let's throw away the egg. Let's crack the egg is cracked now. It's open, and let's crack it open. Let's make sure everybody sees it's open, because we want the world to be sick and tired of that old egg and willing to reject it and replace it with a new egg. That we have this brand new egg that we are going to put in the basket and say, look, this one doesn't stink. This one is a real egg. This is a good egg. Let's get rid of that old egg. And so I think that's maybe is a stupid way of analyzing the substance of what's going on. But for the first time, we're seeing the banking fraternity itself trying to destroy the banking fraternity. Well, not the fraternity, but the banking operations, at least as we know it. They're deliberately doing things that are outrageous. So we've always known that what they've been doing, kicking the can, is not going to work. It's not a solution. It just makes matters worse and worse. But now, when they're out there with the hammer hitting on the egg, this is different. And so the question is, well, why would they want to destroy their own system so that it doesn't function anymore? And by that I mean they are creating money so rapidly and such great quantities. It boggles the mind, and you come to the conclusion real fast that these guys know what they're doing. They know that the system is already gone. They know they've been patching it up, but now they don't care if anybody sees it. In fact, they want it to be so visible now that people will say, well, we've got to have a solution to this problem. And now we come to the big issue, which is what is their so-called planned solution, which is that other new egg I'm talking about. And that, of course, is a new monetary system. It's the elimination of money and the content that we used to think of money as something you owned. It was your money. It was your money. You could put it in your pocket. And the only way they could take it from you is to steal it from you, or they could tax it from you. That's another way of saying stealing. It's against your will. But if you could bury it in a coffee can in the ground, or put it under your mattress or something like that, it was still your money. You could put it in your pocket. But now we're going to a new kind of a system where there'll be no money in a tangible form of any kind. And it's not yours besides. Even if it were tangible, it's not yours. It now belongs to the banks, because the way it gets into the banks now is by edict, by legal system, by law. It's not that you deposit it in there voluntarily because you want to. It's because the law says that all money now originates from there. You don't even have to deposit it in there because that's where it comes from. And you'll be lucky if you get any of it. And you will get some if you are a good boy and a girl and you do exactly what you're told. You'll be able to eke out some kind of a meager existence, or give you enough money to get by on. And of course, if you're up the ladder on the chain of command, and you're rising to the top of the political and corporate top of the world, you do very well indeed, somewhat like the military. If you have rank, if you're a general or a colonel, you live well, you have a nice home, you have servants, you You have a limousine, you have your own private airplane, all that stuff. And it's not important what you're getting paid because everything you want is provided for you. You have your food, your shelter, your health care. You take vacations, any place you want to go, it's all covered, so forth. It's sort of like the military. So money isn't really, it's coming to the point now that money will not be important at all. And it'll be not money at all. It'll be units, credit units. It'll be social credit units, just like they have in China. That's what they're working toward. And as long as you're playing along with the system and you don't make waves, you'll be able to survive. You'll be a slave, but we won't call it that. We'll just call it you'll be a citizen, and we'll take care of you in your time of need. And but if you are like I am, and I suspect like you are, Chris, we won't get any of those social credit systems because we will be considered to be socially unacceptable. And that's where we're heading, and we're heading into it very rapidly now. And the interesting thing that I see is that they don't even try and hide it. They're not even trying to kick the can. They're not saying, look, they're coming to the point where they say, this system is broken and we need a new one. Let's get on with it. And the gum-chewing public will say, yeah, that's a good idea. Oh, I like this idea. Oh, this social credit system. I'm a good person. I have nothing to hide. I'll do well. And besides, I don't even have to work. They give me an annual guaranteed income, and the money comes from them, and they put it into my account, or the money, I should say, the social credits, and I put it in my income, and I'm doing swell. And the idea that I'm not allowed to criticize the government or the banks, well, I can live with that. So that's where we're headed. It took me too long to say that. I apologize for that.
No. That was great. That was great. I mean, what I'm thinking too is, one of the reasons why I think it's really important to capture what you have to say in today's day and age is because, one, the book that you wrote and how much you've been speaking out against the monetary system, the Federal Reserve, for a long time, since the mid 60s that I know of. So, I mean, you're 91 years old. You're sharp. For everything that's going on in this world, you're sharp. You know what's happening. So I appreciate, you kind of giving your explanation because I want to see it from you through your perspective. I think it's important for everybody who's watching us to get your perspective on what's happening. So I want to add a few things and then ask a few more questions. So you were talking about deliberately destroying the banking system. I think that we've been seeing that kind of systematically happening, and it's not necessarily destroying. I look at it as consolidating. They're getting rid of all the smaller and regional banks and trying to get it down to a few, because technically the Federal Reserve cannot offer direct accounts to people. So there's a lot of things that would have to change in legislation for the Federal Reserve to be the bank of the people. So you're going to have like an intermediary, but instead of having all these different choices, I feel like they want to get it down to the few, your JP Morgans, your Bank of Americas, those type of entities that are in the club. The other thing you mentioned money, and going cashless. I think we also need to start realizing there is a difference between the definitions of money and currency. Money would be something like gold. Currency would be something like your fiat money. It's not designed to be a store value. And the currency aspect, they are pushing us into a cashless society. We could see that. We could see what happened during 2020, where they were trying not to accept cash because of passing on of germs and things to that effect. But you mentioned kicking the can down the road, because they're not ready for that new system. But we're on the cusp. We're on the cusp of that new system being ready. And you called it a new egg, a planned solution. And then you mentioned social credit. What are you referring to as the new egg, the planned solution?
Well, that's the very system. The planned solution is to take currency and get rid of it completely. There's nothing that you will be able to put into your hands, either in coin. They won't allow you to use coins. They won't have paper notes or anything. It'll just be a chip in your card that you carry, much like your credit card. I think it's important to point out that we already have digital money, and most people use digital money now, and don't even think about it too much because it's convenient. Credit card money is digital money. So that's not the digital aspect. It's the fact that there is no other form of it. This is the only form of it that they're going to have. So we have digital money now. We can use credit cards, or we can say, well, I want to buy this candy bar with this dollar bill or whatever. Or you can say, look, I want this contract for a car or whatever it is. I want it to be in Federal Reserve notes. And right now, the law requires that people use Federal Reserve notes in the settlement of all debts, private and public. So we still have a tangible, physical form of currency available to us, and I use it as much as I can because I want to encourage um, the stores and the commercial people out there to still remember that, hey, this is good stuff. Currency is good. But
You're talking
anyway,
about physical
yeah,
cash, though, right?
yeah, cashless is different. I mean, there's no cash. You have to use that card. That's
R-
different.
But but when you were mentioning, you're encouraging people to use cash today,
Yes, yes.
because the more
I
cash that we use, the harder it's going to be to take it out of circulation, for one.
Well, that's the theory. I don't think these people care about how hard it is. They've come to the point now where they just do whatever it takes, and if there's a revolution on their hands, they'll just roll the tanks out and mow you down. That they're coming to that point. They're pretty outspoken about their attitude. They don't give a darn what you think, and they know that the elections are pretty well rigged now, so they don't even care how you vote as long as you think you're voting and it's making a difference. That's all they care about. So yeah, it's a question of attitude. But it's really profound when you think about it. If there is no coin, no paper currency of any kind, it's all digital, and that's your only choice. It's a game changer. I mean, you can sit there on the sidewalk with a tin cup out there with a sign that says, "Please help me, I'm hungry," but nobody's got any coins to put in your tin cup. I mean,
You'll have a QR scanner instead.
yeah, QR scanner. Yeah,
Can you
and
scan my QR, please, and
yeah,
drop me some currency?
yeah,
No, you're right, man. With the combination, and what I was getting at with what you were talking about was central bank digital currencies. You're right. Everything we already in a very digital direction, but the launch of the central bank digital currencies, which is a programmable currency. So then you attach that to the social credit score that you were talking about, and then you also attach that to a digital ID, and you literally got people in a digital prison.
you have
You
exactly
have
that.
to follow the protocols, follow the orders, or you won't be able to participate in society.
And let's rephrase it. You won't be able to eat.
Anything, yeah,
Yeah, anything.
anything. So
Participating in society means like sounds almost good. And oh, good. I'll just go up in the mountains and I'll just be a hermit. But no, you won't be able to eat. You won't be able to exchange any goods or services or your cell phone. You couldn't pay a bill for that. You have no cell phone. No, and you have nothing. No clothes, no shelter, no food. That's it. And it's the ultimate prison, as you correctly described it.
this website right here is a central bank digital currency tracker. It explains what a central bank digital currency is, and talking about the nations that have launched it, that have pilots, that are in development, that are in research, that are inactive or canceled. So I would encourage people to definitely check this out in a larger detail. Now, one of the things that you were saying, and we were talking about before we started recording, Mr. G, was when we see the launch of a central bank digital currency, I was talking to you about potentially speaking at one of the Red Pill conferences, one of the Red Pill exhibits, and one of the things I mentioned to you that I've been really trying to focus on, trying to talk about and bring attention to, is agorism, using counter economics, parallel markets, and breakaway communities. And you were talking about um, not really being fond of people kind of breaking out away from the mainstream and just kind of leaving the fight and just kind of doing their own thing. Um, and I agree with you. I'm not a big fan of the people that are expatriating. I understand why some of these individuals are doing it, but I've been researching law and studying the legal system as much as possible to get a better understanding and comprehension of how this works to navigate better. And I definitely feel like it's important for us to remain on this soil as much as possible to keep the American dream and the American values of our founding fathers alive. I'd love for you to share some advice and some information for people, being that you probably have heard everybody talking about all these different things, from prepping to creating different societies, all these different things. What advice would you give to somebody listening to this video about how to handle themselves and what we're experiencing and what's to come?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question that it be answered and answered correctly. And so I'm hesitating because it's such an important topic. I don't want to make any mistakes in how I express it or even how I form it in my own mind. But I think the gist of my attitude, it was pretty well expressed by a closing line in the documentary film of the life of George Orwell. It was done by the BBC quite a while ago, and it's one of the most magnificent documentaries I've ever seen. I mean, I'm kind of in the documentary business. I've produced several of them myself, and I know the techniques, I know the styles, I know the history, all of that, and it's a very rich field, and the professionals in it have gone quite a way from the beginning of it. And out of all of the experience that I've had, I rate this documentary, if not at the top, at least in, say, the top 10 or the top three documentaries I've ever seen. And it was the life of George Orwell. And of course, I don't need to explain that to your listeners. I mean, Orwell is the writer of 1984 and you know, Animal Farm and things like that. It was quite a um,
Yeah.
quite a writer. He was able to take the future. He was kind of futuristic. He was writing about our world today, but he was doing it a long, long time, right after World War II, and very
It was
dramatic.
like he was a time traveler who came back from the future to write what was going to actually happen as a
Yeah,
warning.
yeah, exactly. And we thought it was fiction. But anyway, so having said that, now the documentary is good and all that, but the final line in that whole documentary is the key, I think, to the answer to your question. Now, here's the final line. Orwell was dying of, I've forgotten what it was. I guess it was lung disease of some kind. And anyway, he was in bed, on more or less on his deathbed, and he's being interviewed, supposedly in the documentaries. They were recreating this um, by a news reporter from
Tuber-
presumably the
tuberculosis.
BBC. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was a
tuberculosis.
lady. She was an actress, and she was playing the part of a newspaper reporter, doing an excellent job. So she's at the foot of the bed, and he's lying in the bed, coughing and trying to speak, kind of like I am, gasping for air and all of that. And she said, "Well, Mr. Orwell, in your book 1984, you painted a very grim picture for the future. You know, boot forever stamping on the human face, for example, which is how he phrased it in the book. That was the future he predicted. If we don't change this, the future will be a boot forever stamping on a human face." And she said, "That's a very grim picture. What do you think can be done? What must we do uh, to avoid this?" And he sort of looked into the space for a moment, and then he gasped and he says, "Well, it's very simple. Don't let it happen." And it hit me like a hammer because we're always talking about how can we escape this? You know, how can we benefit while everybody else goes down, but we'll be okay. And he hit the nail on the head as far as I am concerned. There is no escape if we allow it to happen. Well, if there is an escape, it'll probably take hundreds, if not thousands of years because humanity will be in lock, digitally to their masters, whoever they may be at the time. And there'd be no escape because you have no ability to interact with anybody else on the planet. The market, the exchange, the monetary system is completely their weapon. So I mention that because I think when you ask the question, what can we do to uh, to survive? I guess is the basic question, or at least to prosper
Hmm.
in some way. Um, the answer is there is no answer. There's no way to survive or prosper if we let it happen. So what are we talking about the impossible for? Let's talk about what we must do to prevent it from happening. Now that doesn't mean you can't be smart and say a little bit. Look, the short term is like what happens next week or next month or for the next 1 or 2 years. You certainly don't want to be in a situation where you have no food supplies. If you're living from hand to mouth and you've only got 3 days worth of food and then you got to go to the grocery store, that's a bad position to be in, especially when you think that something could happen when the grocery stores will be cleaned out and there will be no deliveries of new groceries. And it's, you can be realistic and say, well, there's a short-term and a long-term answer to this question. Now, if you do that, I'm all on board for what can we do to survive in the short term. We may want to stock up on food and maybe things that we could barter. That could be gold coins or silver coins or something like that. It could be boxes and boxes and boxes of toilet paper.
So yeah, toilet paper.
Who knows? Okay, if you're in the business and you're in the tire business, some people will still be wanting tires. They'll have gas, and so maybe you should take whatever savings you have and put part of it into a warehouse of extra tires of all different sizes, so you could barter tires and things like that. It's a grim thought to be thinking so defensively and so pessimistically, but I think it's realistically actually in these times. But I come back to my point: don't let it happen is the main goal. So whatever we do for the short term, and I'm all for that, by the way, and I try to do some of that myself, but I'm putting most of my focus, most of my energy, most of my resources onto a plan to don't let it happen. And that's why I've created Freedom Force International and the Red Pill Project and those kinds of things, because we have to build and do it quickly. We have to build a countermeasure and prevent it from happening.
What would you recommend that people do to be proactive into not letting what you mentioned be a future, to prevent that reality from even taking place? Obviously, I mean, we want to suggest things that wouldn't encourage any sort of violence. I mean, I would say that would be a last resort, but looking at studies of what's happening, looking at this book called The Fourth Turning, which is a sociological study looking at what's happening in astrology. We're at a really interesting time period. Astrology wise, we just returned last year to the same point that we were during the Revolutionary War. The Fourth Turning is a sociological study that talks about lifetimes and different cycles that take place that are very repetitious. And fourth turnings are crisis situations that usually result in some sort of war, whether civil or worldwide. And it's sort of a breaking down of a system and a creation of a new system that would lead back into the next first turning, going back into the next saculum. So what would you recommend to people to be proactive to try to prevent this reality, this potential future from becoming a reality?
Well, I think it's very simple in concept, but not so simple in execution. We must regain control of the political system, because the political system is the entity that has the power to make things happen. We can clamor all we want to for reform. We can write books and produce documentaries and give speeches on we should do this and we should do that and we have to do this, and we're like a bunch of inmates in a prison sitting in the mess hall complaining about the food. We should have better food, and so forth. But the warden and the guards don't care what you're saying because you're their prisoner. So I get very short in patience with people who say we should do this, and they got this big long list, and they send me the letters. Don't you know that we have to do this, 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 and this? And of course I know those things, but I'm wasting my time talking about them because we need to get back to the point where we can do those things that we know have to be done, and that means we have to recapture the political system. Now, a lot of people say, "Well, are you kidding? Well, we can't do that." Well, if we can't do that, then we're through. Because unless we are the ones that control the police and the military, we lose. And we ain't the ones that control the police and the military right now.
No.
And now how do we do that? Well, now you come to the hard choices. In the past, it was often done by revolution or invasion, was conquest. It was always force, physical force was always at the base of who's going to write the laws, who's going to set the norms for the existing society. I mean, if we had lost the Revolutionary War, we wouldn't even be talking about this because we'd be subjects of Great Britain, and we'd be in pretty much the same position, if not worse, because we were a colony, as the people in England today, in the UK. And maybe not even that good, because I think England would have gone further south if it hadn't been for the influence of the United States and the principles that were popularized by the miracle of America and its success in the world for a couple of 100 years.
Oh, the internet.
It all starts with getting back into control of our power centers, and that would be political parties, it would be schools, it would be media centers, it would be all of the power centers of society in which a few people at the top can influence the attitudes and the decisions and the goals of the majority. And then our opponents study that element of strategy very carefully, and they're masters of it. They know how to use organizations that they control at the top. It might even be labor unions. It could be all of these things. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, all these groups and organizations. You look at the top, and much to your amazement, if you're looking for it, you realize that these people, for the most part, don't believe in the principles that the average American believes in. They're all for what we're talking about, all these evil things. They can hardly wait to bring it on, and they're supporting it. And they make no bones about it now. And we have to start asking the question, well, how did they get to be there? How come all of these great organizations, the corporate world, all these big companies, all the government agencies, all the governments around the world, all want this new world order of collectivism and control at the top and blah, 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 blah. I mean, how did that happen? Well, it happened because there are people out there who are very well organized and know how to get control of the power centers of society. And then the politicians, they can be purchased by money, and they are, and by donations and all that sort of thing. And so you control the money, you control the politicians, you control the political system. Now you're cooking. Now you can make almost anything happen because nobody can resist your power. You control the police and the military, and of course the influence the media centers, which influence the public acceptance of what you're doing. You can do the most horrible things, but if you control the media, people will think you're a hero. You know, they'll just explain it in certain ways. Well, it's a good thing we had that. Like after Pearl Harbor, when it was finally revealed that FDR hid information from the commanders at Pearl Harbor that the Japanese were coming, and it was no surprise attack at all in Washington, D.C., but they hid that information from the commanders on Jekyll Island. I'm not Jekyll Island, excuse me, on Pearl Harbor.
Right.
But they hid that information because they wanted Americans to die. They wanted 2,000 sailors to be killed. They wanted the ships to be photographed going up in flames and smoke, and they wanted all that horrible death, destruction, anguish, and horror, so that the American people would say, "Oh boy, we better get into this war. We'll show those Japanese, for they can't do that to us." And so it was all revealed finally, and nobody really questions it anymore because the documents are there that that's exactly what happened. But now the historians, shortly after that, started writing books about, well, isn't that so wise of President Roosevelt to do that? Oh, it was too bad about those 2,000 American sailors that went down in those ships. That was terrible. But it was such good statesmanship on his part, because without that, we wouldn't have been able to get into the war. And maybe the Japanese would have attacked us on our homeland. But by being in the war, we were able to be at the center of the decisions after the war in the remolding of the world's political system. And we were able to be influential in the creation of the United Nations, that wonderful organization. Nice. And so wasn't it wise and good that happened? This is how they always rationalize it, you see. That's the principle
Yeah,
of
wasn't it good that we allowed for we sacrificed several thousand Americans so that we could get into the war and save the world and become the police of the world? And
That's
yeah,
it exactly. And that's the mantra that you find behind all of these collectivist schemes, because they believe that the individual must be sacrificed if necessary for the greater good of the greater number. That's their mantra. And I used to believe that too, by the way, when I went through school. I thought it was a good idea. Well, it's greater good of the number. That's good. That's democracy, right?
Mhm.
Well, anyway, we don't want to go off on that one. Nevertheless, that's how they do it. And so we have to be above all of that, but we have to be aware of how they play the game. And your question is good. What do we do to turn the tide? And it's not the question of what we do to avoid the tide. We can do that for a little bit, but the tide keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we have to turn the tide, not just try and climb to higher ground.
And I like the idea of recapturing the political system. And when I first got involved in just like being red pilled by you and other individuals, I that was the last thing, the furthest thing on my mind was participating in the political system. But I'm starting to realize that if we had good politicians in office that were doing the right thing for the people, that we could make some actual progress and change. Now, I mean, I think there's obviously other things aside from recapturing our political system, just like for the everyday individual. What is there anything that you would recommend that would be reachable for most people?
Well, my mind is still hung up on the first part of your statement, which is if we had some good politicians only, if we only had some good politicians in office, then everything would be good. Um,
Well, it would
I'm
be
reminded,
better. It would be putting us in a better. We don't have people speak like I haven't seen politicians speaking out against the Federal Reserve. You know, you
yeah,
see like the little hearings that they do at Jerome Powell, which is just just a circus act.
yeah,
But you're not seeing people like really speak out against these individuals. You don't see people that were speaking out like JFK. You're not seeing situations. Even Ronald Reagan, before he became president, was very outspoken. You're just today, Ron Paul back in 2010, 2012 was like talking about ending the Fed, ending taxation. You don't hear politicians these days saying any of those kind of things. It's just to me, I've been just equating it to right wing, left wing, same bird. They're all working for the same agenda.
well, that's definitely true. That part is easy to see if you just open your eyes, which unfortunately a lot of people don't want to see that, because that means that their decisions and their choices are much more complicated. If all they have to do is worry about who you're going to vote for, you know, are you going to vote Republican or Democrat? If that's your only, that's how you serve your country and you display your responsibility of citizenship, is just by going to the polls once every 2 or 4 years and putting an X on a ballot, and you say, "Oh, I'm a good American. I did
I've
my
done my
bit.
part.
I've
Yeah.
done my part." Yeah, and they don't realize that whoever you're voting for has probably been selected by the same people on both sides.
Well, that's why they
That's the
call it a
part.
selection, not an election.
Yeah, selection is good way of putting it. So I think that caught my. I couldn't get over that because I wanted to say something about it, which is that I don't care so much what these politicians say. They all do a pretty good job of saying things in a way that it sounds pretty good, even if you know that they don't mean it. It sounds good. You want to hear them say it, you know, and we know that they don't mean it in most cases. That's the thing. People are not going to win this battle if they keep believing what they're hearing politicians say. They have to start looking at what they do and
Actions.
what they have done, which is the only way you can tell what they're going to do. I think very fondly of that a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a friend after the Constitution was drafted uh, and placed into law. He got a letter from a doctor friend, and he said, "Mr. Jefferson, now that we have this Constitution, new Constitution, and the Republic," he actually used that word, I believe, he said, "how can we be sure that only good men hold office?" And Jefferson's answer was profound, I think. on the verge of being irate. He said, "Speak to me not of good men in office. Let us rather bind men down with the chains of the Constitution." And in modern language, he would have said, "Good men in office? Are you kidding me? You know, well, of course not. You're not going to have good men in office. You never will. You have to depend. You have to build a system where you anticipate that evil men will be in office. Now, how do you do it?" That was his attitude. That people can be compromised and will be compromised. They'll be threatened. They'll be blackmailed. Um, they will not hold up in the long term. So you cannot win your liberty or maintain your liberty if you're depending on having good men in office. So that's a whole different paradigm. So the answer, as we move forward and we struggle to regain control of the political system, we have to keep this thought in mind, and that is, it's not just getting the good guys elected. After they're elected, they may change their position. We may find out that they didn't really mean what they said, or that they're vulnerable. Or we may find out that it's not them at all, that they just don't know, and that they may think they're doing the right thing, but are they doing the right thing? So you have to talk in terms of the system and the principles behind the system, not just the names of the people that get to hold all this power and spend all this money. Because I guarantee you, as long as we have a big structure of government where we have all this power and unlimited money, it will not work, even with good people in office, because the good people in office will be corrupted by it, or they will be murdered to get out of the office and put somebody else in, or they will be threatened in some way. It'll just go, and they'll die, of course, and be replaced eventually by somebody else who dies, and they'll be eventually replaced by somebody else. And it's just a question of how many rotations of the wheel does it take before all those good people are gone and all the crooks and the predator class are in office, which is what happens in all governments, which are based on the principle of lots of power and lots of money, which ours is definitely based on that principle. So I say this is important if we're going to talk in terms of getting people elected and regaining control of the political system. We must also include in that list of things of making sure that the design of the political system is correct, that the design of the political system is that it is not, the political system is not designed to do everything you want to do, because the political system is based on the legalized use of force. It's based upon, you can kill somebody to make them obey this law. That's a serious thought. We have the legal right to kill you if you don't do these things in law. We execute people because they kill others. Okay, that's in law. So that's a serious issue. So you have to be very, very sure, what are those things that you have the right to use force to make sure it happens. And nobody ever talks about that. They just think, well, whatever we want to do. If we get a majority vote, we can do whatever we want to. And we can kill people to make them obey the majority, right? That's the present system. That has to go. That's part of the problem. In fact, it's the major part of the problem, because good men cannot survive that kind of a system. We have to realize that the only function of the state, which means to use coercion, to use force for, are those things which individuals themselves have the right to use force for. If we believe in the idea that government derives its powers, its just powers, from the will of the people and the rights of the people, that means that the people can delegate that right to the government only for those things that they also have a right to kill for, or to use force against another person for. Well, what are those things? Well, that's really easy. Nobody would object, or very few would object, if you killed somebody in your own self-defense because they were trying to kill you. I mean, of course, most people say, well, of course, it's self-defense. They're trying to kill you, man. And so there's one. Very few people would object if somebody wanted to make a slave out of you against your will. I mean, you would have a right to use force to defend yourself and get yourself out of slavery, even to get out, even to kill if necessary, because your God-given rights or your inbred rights or whatever they are, they come with you, they're hardware, not software, are to life and liberty. I mean, everybody would be willing to use force to defend their life and their liberty. So those are the things that you have the just right to delegate to the government. You have those rights yourself. So you can say, okay, I hereby delegate to my government the right to defend my life and my liberty, and they can use force to do so. But now I cannot delegate force to the government to force my neighbor to close his shop on Sunday, or to teach his children such and such and such, or to avoid criticizing somebody and hurting their feelings, or to negotiate with them a pay rate that which is lower than what I think they should do. All those things. I can't use physical force against my neighbor to do any of those things, and therefore I cannot delegate the use of physical force to the government to do any of those things. And now we have a clear understanding of what the political system should be. If we ever built that kind of a system, then it makes no difference than who is in charge, because they don't have the authority to murder at their own will. They don't have the authority to plunder and all of the other things that the criminals usually do once they get into power.
It's sad. I mean, you said a lot of very wise things, which I appreciate. One thing I was going to say earlier that is, I think we all are currently slaves, even, me and you, because we're all part of this debt-based monetary system that we have to participate in, or not be able to take advantage of the things in life that we would like to have, like a nice home and pay our bills and things. You have to be a part of that make-believe game of Monopoly that we're playing with all this fake money in order to live. So we are kind of debt slaves, but I would love to see politicians being accountable. I mean, I feel like what you said with Thomas Jefferson, the creation of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution was supposed to be there to protect the people from the government. It was because of the fact that you can't rely on good men, good women. You just can't rely on good people, because people can be corrupted, like you mentioned. And it's just sad to see where we've come as a nation, where I believe it was like 19 enumerated powers that were given to the federal government. And look how that has expanded, how the federal government has just grown into this monstrosity compared to what it was supposed to be. People question the ratification of the 16th Amendment. I mean, there's so many different things. Us printing money that's not backed by gold and silver being unconstitutional. There's so many things that the government is doing that is against the Constitution, and there is no consequences for the government doing that. And it definitely is important for us to correct that situation. And that's what I try telling people, Mr. G, and some people don't agree with me, but I tell people that we are equally the problem and the solution, because all of this has happened because of the consent of the governed. And I'm not saying that silence is consent, but if you're not doing anything to prevent these things from taking place, then you're consenting, when it really comes down to it, because everything that's supposed to happen is supposed to happen because the people allow it to happen. Would you agree with that?
Well, I do, up to a point. There is a point where you accept something, you don't resist it, because if you do, the consequences would be too serious for you or your family. I mean, if a man is concerned about supporting his family, feeding his wife and his children, and if he speaks out against the system, his family suffers, because he no longer can get groceries, and he's got to go and beg for food for his family, and he remains silent in order to feed his family. I mean, we're dealing with a gray area there. I think what you said is true in principle, but also there's another aspect to it. I used to be more critical of my fellow human beings, because I thought, what's wrong with these people? Can't they see what's going on? And then I mellowed a little bit as I realized that the propaganda that is being put out there is so professional and so good, so effective, that I can see where a lot of people would be confused. And I guess the expression nowadays is they've been gaslighted. They've been convinced because of the propaganda that they don't really understand what's going on. They're not qualified to make decisions or to criticize the decisions of those who are experts on it, and that it's probably just as well that we have professional politicians making these decisions, and that we as individuals should have very little voice in it, because we would really mess things up if we did. That's the sort of the message that's been delivered all this time. If you question COVID, for example, oh, what do you know? Are you a doctor? This sort of thing. It doesn't make any difference that you can look around and see your neighbors and look, lots of people, and the only ones who are sick and dying are the ones that got the shot. That doesn't make any difference what you observe. It said, oh, you're a doctor. What do you know about this? So I have a great deal of empathy for people who are passive on what's going on, because they just are confused and they don't know what the right thing is to do.
I like that you said that you mellow it out, though, because I have tried to be as compassionate as I can for the people that are suffering from what I call cognitive dissonance. A lot of people refer to it as that. It's, and it isn't necessarily anybody's individual fault. I mean, the education system is put in place by design, the mainstream news, the programming that people watch on television, it's called programming for a reason. The propaganda, as you mentioned, it's sad. So, I mean, I appreciate you and what you've been doing. You're pretty much most of your life trying to raise awareness to wake people up. And, again, I really appreciate you putting out this book. This was you are one of the first people that really red pilled me, and I really appreciate everything that you've done. I do want to come out to the next Red Pill, and hopefully I can do an in-person interview with you. I definitely want to meet you in person, and I want to be respectful of your time. I appreciate you doing this interview. I want to give you a few moments here to promote what you have going on. I will have links down below for your Twitter account if people want to follow you there over on Twitter. We also have redpilluniversity.org. This will be linked down below, as well as the Expo page for the Red Pill Expo coming up. And there is also needtoknow.news. Anything that you want to share in regards to any of the stuff that you're working on, Mr. G, or any final thoughts for today's interview?
Well, thank you for that. Yes, all of those things are important. All of those sites, we probably have too many of them for my preference, because I have to maintain most of those. But I don't know how to simplify it. So we've broken it down into different categories. And I think for a person who's really sensitive to the issues that we've been discussing, in other words, a person who really has this desire to be the change, to make a difference, to make the better world that we talk about, not just to observe what's happening, but to become a force to determine what is happening. The best place to start is with, right now, I would say the Red Pill Expo, because it's an event that's coming up in August, and we're assembling the speakers now for it. It's going to be a great group. Yeah, scroll a little bit more. You see some of those people that are already committed to speak.
Who's this guy, G. Edward Griffin, is speaking?
Oh, I don't know. I'd be careful of him if I were you. But yeah, we've got some great names that we haven't talked to anybody about it, because they're working on their schedules to see if they can come. Anyway, that's a good place to start. And from there to Red Pill University, which is an ongoing operation, 24/7, 365 days a year. And our goal there is to build campuses, boots on the ground, so to speak, in every county in the United States and in similar political subdivisions around the world. Because unless we have people working together on a local basis, we're not going to recapture the political system that we're talking about. That movements of that kind always start at the bottom up. They never start from the top down. So we know that our opponents, they have their organizations well funded by people like George Soros and others, and the government too. Well-funded organizations all around in every little local community you can imagine, that they show up, to influence elections and voting patterns and so forth. They're there, and we wonder, my goodness, how did this happen? Well, it happened because they have people who are, I call them boots on the ground, political boots on the ground in every community, and we have nothing like that. We have in the past, at least. So we're building campuses of Red Pill University in the local communities. That's a very, very important step to achieving our goal of recapturing the system. And so I urge you to take a special interest in that and come to the event if you possibly can. It's in Des Moines, Iowa, and it's the dates
August 12th
August
and 13th.
12 and 13. Yeah, and of course, if you can't come, it's all live stream, and we'll get we'll set up somehow. We'll get some kind of a local representative to come and talk to you and see about building a campus in your community. Very important. I couldn't emphasize this enough. This is the important thing to do. And of course, you get eventually to our bookstore, which is realityzone.com. Well, that's where we just we have books and videos and audio recordings. And if you want to learn more about some of the issues that we've discussed.
I thought I had this website pulled up for whatever reason, but I guess I didn't. But I will make sure I do have it linked down below. In addition to needtoknow.news, which is a great resource for a lot of stuff happening that you won't see reported on the mainstream news sources. And then again, there is Mr. G's Twitter account, which you can find at @G_Edward_Griffin, and all this will be linked down below.
So that'll be it. If you
Mr.
can take
G?
all of that, you're ready. You're ready for the war.
You're ready for the red pill war. I agree, man. I agree. And I will definitely send some information to you privately about a presentation idea. And if you allow me to have the opportunity to participate, and not that I wouldn't anyways, I'll make sure that between now and then that we promote the event, so that we can let people know what's going on, whether it's you coming back on or maybe bringing on Dan or someone else with the team. I'm definitely wanting to be able to promote everything that you're doing. And I appreciate everything that you've been doing, man. Thank you for continuing to remain in the fight. Thank you for not withdrawing back and just enjoying life and retiring. Thank you for being here with us, man.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I take my hat off to you. You're doing your job there. You're spreading the word. And, we're all the same. I don't care how much of a leadership position we're thrust into. And I mean that literally thrust into it. I don't think many people seek it. But no matter where you are, we're all looking for support from others at our side. You know that song, "Give me some men who are stout-hearted men. I'll soon give you 10,000 more. Shoulder to shoulder, boulder and boulder." That's it's real. It's
it. Go on.
It's human nature. And so the more people who stand up and speak out and get shoulder to shoulder, the movement grows that way. That's why we have to get people together face to face. You cannot build a movement on the internet. You can't, in spite of how great it is, and the communication capabilities are fantastic. If you're going to build a political movement in the sense that I'm talking about, you've got to be face to face with people. You've got to have coffee with them. You've got to learn something about them. You've got to bond with them. You learn to trust them, and so forth. That's how movements are built. And that's one of the missing ingredients so far on our side of this battle. So that's what I'm going to close with that. Let's get together. Let's meet face to face. Let's get to know each other. And then let's build a coalition that the opposition cannot resist.
Well said, Mr. G. Just bear with me real quick. I want to do the wrap up of the recording. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will have links down below for everything shared on today's show. I do encourage you to check out the previous interviews that I did with Mr. G. I will have that playlist linked down below, and I will do another video in between now and the Red Pill Expo when it's taking place. Before we wrap up, make sure you're subscribed here at Rice TVX on my other channel, Rice Against the Grain, and I will leave you with a little positivity. I encourage you, as always, to be a blessing to others, treat people how you want to be treated, be the glitch that you want to see in the matrix, be the change that you want to see in the world, set that example. And until next time, practice change.